I'm here with Rietje Keys again, and this is on June 4th, 2024. And we're here to talk about her life experiences. And she is going to, at this time, she's going to do an introduction of all of her siblings.
Thank you, Mary. I talked a lot about myself in our first what is it called in the first section?
Session or
or session, and I want to give you an idea who everybody, all my brothers and sisters, who they were, and a bit about the personalities. And then I have to begin with, or to start with Katie, my oldest sister, who was born in 1918. And she was put in charge of the children later a lot. She had the personality of my dad, and was not an easy person to deal with. She was very moody, also extremely smart and intelligent. And since she was the oldest and she had so many children around her and often was in charge of them, that was not an easy task. However, she was difficult to deal with. If you would do something nice for her, it would reverberate later against you. And that was a trait that was very slippery and difficult to do with or to deal with. She also had two handicaps. She was born with one eye that did not have much vision, and then later, as she was a toddler, she became blind. As she grew up, her nose became rather prominent, like in the Wachtenonk family that is there. And she also had legs that were like poles. There was no what is the word? Well, in any case, her legs were straight, and that was one thing that she hated, and I would have hated it too. But I think that there are many people who have all these things that she had and led a happy life. Kaya was, I think, in essence, not a happy person. And so then we go to my second oldest sister. Her name was Willy, which was she was hardly ever called Willy, it was always Will. And she was very different, had a very different personality, different character. She was much softer and rather motherly, a nurturer, and also very smart. But as a child, she was often very sick and stayed with my German grandparents, who lived not too far after they retired and sold the restaurant. They lived close to my dad and mom in The Hague, and Will was often sent to her grandparents in order to have really relaxed meals because she had a problem eating and she was very skinny. But she later, as a teenager, she was beautiful, really nice. Everybody, all my brothers loved her. And this went on till late in life. Will was the one who everybody gathered around and loved. She was a center. And then the next one is Jan, a brother. My mother said she prayed for a boy after she had two girls, and so here Jan came into the world. And Jan was extremely bright, not a difficult child, but had his own idea of how to live. Went through school with lots of problems because he could not always take advice from what's called authorities. He rebelled, and it was hard to get him through grammar school, through high school. Once he was through high school, he wanted to study medicine. Once he started to study medicine, he couldn't stop studying. He loved it, and he was extremely good and became the protege of one of the professors at the University of Leiden, and he was just fantastic.
What year was he born?
He was born in 1922. In 1922.
Okay.
And he was, besides good in science, he also had beautiful handwriting and was very artistic. Poetry, the way my dad and mom had a big party at their 25th wedding anniversary, and he set up the whole thing and was just inventive and fun and really clever. So that's really good. And then the next boy was born, and his name was Theo. And Theo was a real tidy little boy. Very, very, very neat, very precise. And at the age of 12, he wanted to become a priest. And he was sent to a seminary, which now, retrospect, that's not a good thing to do to a child. In any case, he would come home for vacations and then all of a sudden was put in this very busy family life, and always was a little bit on the side, did not have the same exuberant that all my other brothers had a good sense of humor, but it seldom came out, and he was just a little bit, even later in life, different from my other brothers. He also had a voice that was very staccato and not always pleasant to listen to. Very bright. He later took over the office of my dad and was a very good accountant. And then the next brother, that was Eric, who was born two years after Theo, so it must have been like 24. And Eric was a very, very quiet child, a good observer. They always said of Eric that you could explode a bomb under his chair, and he would just look and say, "Oh." It was just his way of dealing with life, I guess. Also very bright and inventive, but very, very quiet. Then the next brother, 2 years later, who was born, and his name was Tim. And actually his name was William, but nobody could pronounce, which in Dutch translates into Wim, but nobody could say Wim, so they called him Tim, and it was Tim forever. And Tim is, or was, amazing. He was emotional, he was bright, he could tell stories. He would always get candy out of his ear for me, or out of his knee. He was just an amazing child. He absolutely adored me. And if there was a celebration in his classroom, in Holland, children from the mother get a bag of candy, and you would go around and present a candy to every child in your class. Well, Tim would not eat his candy, but he would hold it in his hand for me until he was home and give it to me, which I think is just fantastic. And the stories he would tell all of us were sometimes hair-raising. We had a special room for the children, and when it got dark, he opened the curtains and we had the light of the lanterns outside, the street lights, and he would tell scary stories in the dark. And he was so good. He had a mind that was never at rest. It was wonderful. Then, after Tim was born, Augie, actually Jerry and I gave August, this brother, his name, because August here in America is usually called Augie. And August, we called him August most of the time, but sometimes Eusie. And he had a lot of names, and he also had a brain, but he was made for dealing. He would have made a good salesman. He would talk you into anything, and he always could get anything. He also always would see a way of getting things, which during the war especially was fantastic. But he was a very, very special child, and he was the only one who was born with my dad's curly hair. The only thing was that his hair was not curly, it was kinky and difficult to handle, so it was always kept very short. And then after Eusie, or Augie, Hans was born. And Hans was a child born with asthma. And so he had problems breathing, and that's the only child, the only baby that my father would pick up voluntarily and walk when Hans would cry and gasp for air. And this lasted for about 2 years, and then he grew out of that. And Hans turned out to be a rather difficult child. You never knew what Hans would say that was really true. He had big imagination, but, kind of lived in another world at times. but also very bright, and he became the worker in the family. He was the one that kept the central heating going, because at that time that was fed with coal, and he had to do that. He was difficult in school, although very intelligent, but like Jan, just hard to manage. And later he ended up as a wireless operator on tankers in whatever sea he was sailing on. And he was loved by the crew. He was very social, created parties, was always ready for people who had a problem to come talk with him. He also became a secretary of the captain. Hans was a very, when he was in his element, Hans was just a very, very nice man to be with. And then, after Hans, Walter was born. And Walter, as he grew up, was a very precocious little boy, always got in some kind of trouble. And my parents called him, in Dutch it's called Walter Muis Huizenkruis, which means that he was the house cross, the troublemaker, the one who needed watching. But he also was very, very sweet and sweet-natured, and he was my biggest friend because we were playmates, and we have always been, even in our teens, we had the same friends, went to the same parties, and Walt was a born gentleman. Even as a teenagers, when we got in the car, he would walk around, open the car for me, and do the same when we arrived. He was just a born gentleman. It was amazing, and I loved him to pieces. So, and then after all these boys, I popped out, and that's where we go on.
So you were number 10.
But I was number 10.
10 and born in 1932.
I was born on the 25th of January in 1932. And so as we're talking now, I'm sitting here and I'm 92, which is unimaginable to me.
And you have
I have a picture of myself. Let me get my wine glass out of the way. Can you see it?
It's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yep.
Okay.
And you must have been what?
Pardon?
How old were you in that picture?
I think I must have been close to 3.
Yes.
And this was, Katie and Willie took me to a photographer, and I still remember the occasion because they put me on a very high chair. So, you know, the camera I would be in tune with the camera, or in view of the camera. And it turned out that I was afraid of height. And I sat there and they said, smile. And I couldn't smile because I was afraid. And I wanted to cry. So they told me after this event to not say anything because that picture was for Mama for her birthday. And so here I sat at dinner, and at that time photographers still covered their heads, and they had a big camera, and I would put the tablecloth over my head and say kiek kiek, which is the, you know, here they say cheese, and in Holland they say kiek kiek. because it gets your mouth like keek keek. And so my two sisters were prodding me and saying, be quiet, be quiet. But of course, the secret was out.
Yep.
And hence this little picture. I'll take a rest for just a second.